I'll give it a couple of seconds. Are you showing that we're going live on your side, Vlad?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Hey everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I am Dave. If you guys haven't met, or if you are following us through Phil's channel, all the way from Australia, welcome and good morning. So Manufacturing Hub, we do shows every Wednesday. Typically, we do it a little bit earlier, but to facilitate Phil's schedule and everyone who wants to, sleep semi-normal hours in Australia, we are coming a little bit later. The general overview of our show is we're kind of a general, fun, happy interview style show with myself and Vlad, my counterpart up here. Every month we pick a topic. This month we're talking all about SCADA, and this is why we have Phil here. This is why Phil has so graciously joined us. It has been a long time coming, as Phil will mention. I think we've talked about this for no less than a year of when we can get him on. But we're talking all about SCADA. We are generally a fun show. If you guys have questions and comments, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We do our best to get to them on lots of shows, as I imagine this could also be. We will probably get more questions and comments that we can possibly answer. But please feel free to go drop them in the chat, drop them in the events, and we do our best to come back and answer every single one of them as later in the week. And so again, welcome everyone who has not met us before. As we're letting everyone go ahead and pile in, I guess a couple of quick comments. One, everyone from the US, happy slightly early Thanksgiving. So for everyone not in the US, American Thanksgiving is tomorrow. So happy early Thanksgiving. Hopefully everyone gets to be home and with their families and all of those other things and not out on the road, as I know many people are. So everyone welcome. And then for everyone that doesn't know, Vlad, my counterpart, runs Solus PLC, both the website and the YouTube channel. They do lots of training. We are currently streaming on Solus PLC's YouTube, so wave to say hi to everyone from Solus PLC. One thing new listeners will not know is Vlad does an absolutely terrible job asking people to subscribe to his own channel. So what I like to ask everyone to do is please go and hit that subscribe button on Solus PLC's YouTube, hit that thumbs up. It helps Vlad's metrics and all of those other things. And as more people, we've crested 34,000 at this point, subscribe, I just completely take credit because Vlad doesn't ask. And what are
Thank you,
friends
Dave.
for?
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. What are friends for, Vlad, if not to take credit every Wednesday for the hard work of their counterpart on the show. But no, without further ado, everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I am Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. We are excited to continue our conversation on SCADA, and we'd like to welcome Phil Seboa on. Phil, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure actually chatting with you guys. And as I said, it's been a long time coming. I've been a long time watcher of you guys' content, and you're doing a really great job.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Phil. Before we dive into the main topic of SCADA and sort of unravel its mysteries, complexities, and etc., could we get a bit of a background about yourself? How did you get started in your career? How did you progress in manufacturing automation? And what are you doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is very different to the traditional, I guess, electrical type backgrounds. I've been a very, I guess, up and down, windy road type of career. So I started when I was 16 years old, almost 20 years ago now, or more than 20 years ago now, as an electrical apprentice for a domestic electrician over in London. And I got to work in some really interesting places, being in hospitals, in mental hospitals, in factory floors, up in rooftops, installing CCTV systems, fire alarm systems, domestic lighting, running cables, getting really, I guess, real hard graft, and especially in London where it gets pretty cold, we're pulling in cables that are rigid stuff. And then we moved, and then I kind of developed and moved over here into Australia and took some of those skill sets within electric motor company doing electric motor, I guess, modifications. And then I started running all the administration for that workshop. And then I moved into sales, and I was like, okay, let's give this a go. It's pretty interesting field where you get to meet so many different people, and that's what I'm more, interested in, is that customer service type application, getting to know my customers, getting to interact with all these different wild and wonderful applications. And then I moved into another role, which was for a huge transformer manufacturer who was making insulation materials for high voltage transformers. And then that was a whole different industry, from that domestic and industrial background into a utility type infrastructure. So it kind of keeps broadening my industry knowledge in that space as well. And then I moved on to Phoenix Contact, which, for everyone that doesn't know, is a huge terminal manufacturer, but they also are a huge automation focused company nowadays as well, and really kind of expanding that IoT platform and getting up to speed, and their PLCs are really maturing in that space as well. But they've got huge range of products within their portfolio. So I was able to learn a lot about industrial automation through that experience that I had. And I got to really, I guess, learn the fundamentals of what it takes from the ground up in that OT layer to be able to accumulate that amount of data, distribute it within a network infrastructure, and then be able to create that context layer that we talk about in SCADA as well. So then once I was really, I guess, really interested in that PLC Next type infrastructure and developing my skill set within that ecosystem. And then I came across Ignition as part of that learning curve, and I guess, saw the potential of that product portfolio, and joined the Australian distributor iControls as part of that journey, and that kind of brings me up to current day. But yeah, I've done I guess various different roles within my career, from that maintenance type application to manufacturing to really cover off, and even a bus driver once upon a time as well.
Bill, if I can expand on one experience, I guess, earlier in your career, the switch from, being a technical expert to going into sales, was that a planned event? Was that just a great opportunity that came up? And also, maybe in hindsight, how was that transition, right? Was that something that you got trained on the job to do, or did you have to maybe fill in with some courses, trainings? And I would say, like, in hindsight also, would you do things differently?
So it was a kind of a choice from my perspective. So the role that I was doing was, I guess, I was modifying electric motors. I was doing a lot of heavy lifting, and my hands from the early days were getting a bit, fatigued, should I say. What I didn't realize is I would be transitioning a screwdriver to a keyboard, which actually doesn't make too much difference in the long run. But and what I found is that actually my passion is with problem solving and customer service. I love that people to people interaction, and that's a key skill that you need for selling, really, because you're really interacting with the people that you're trying to solve problems for at the end of the day. So that is a real core skill. It is something that you can learn and develop. It's not something that you necessarily have to have ingrained in your being. And I know a lot of system integrators and a lot of engineers and technical people aren't always the most, I guess, outbound and not, they're quite introverted people who kind of love what they do, but not necessarily be able to communicate that to large audiences or even small rooms of teams. And that's something that you can develop after practicing and upskilling yourself. So absolutely, training. There's a large range of free online training in terms of sales resources that you can leverage, and also paid courses, of course. In-person training is vital, actually, for that. I did sit, a 5-day training course in my early days to kind of get the fundamentals of the sales process as well, because that's something that really you need as part of a salesman in that space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think again, a lot of people are considering that option and maybe don't have all the information they need to maybe undertake that transition, or maybe they don't even know that those options are available. Because I see more and more, I want to say, technical people that have those communication skills go into an area like sales, as you said, because it still gives them a chance to understand the technical aspects, but figure out a solution that fits a specific customer, which I think personally is a very interesting kind of endeavor. And there's nothing like dull in that, right? Because you're always going to different customers, and we can get into like specifics a bit later. But I just think it's an interesting choice of career for sure. But Phil, if we can expand to today, right? So fast forwarding, you've been doing sales for quite a bit of time now. What are you doing in iControls, and more specifically, I guess, what does iControls like provide as well at this point? And also maybe point us a geographical location. I know you mentioned Australia, but who do you work with at what level of manufacturing, and kind of who are your customers in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're based in Brisbane. Our HQ is in Brisbane, which is on the east coast of Australia, but we are a national, we look after nationally. So we do look after the whole of Australia. So you may have seen me flying about servicing customers and going to exhibitions and trade shows and all that sort of stuff to try and, I guess, support that ignition ecosystem. So as iControls, we are, I guess, our motto is to enable digital transformation. So we do that by bringing in technical products that really support our openness and our ethos in that area. And Ignition is a key part of that for us. So we are the Australian distributors for Ignition. And we really try and have in-depth conversations with our customer base, whether that be end users or our system integrator partners, to be able to create solutions for those end users that are really of high quality and of open structures, scalable systems, and really, I guess, try and listen to the customer about what their problems are to be able to create a solution that really tackles that issue for them.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. If I can, I guess, launch us into the SCADA conversation with, I guess, a fairly simple question, Phil. So SCADA, maybe not so simple, but SCADA, I feel, is, when you say digital transformation, to some degree has gotten maybe like lost, right? Because we talk a lot about Industry 4.0, we talk about MES, we talk about data analytics. And SCADA is almost, to me, like the backbone of how that data kind of gets between devices. And although, there's edge devices as well, there's now smarter PLCs and what have you. But are you having a lot of conversations around SCADA specifically, or do you think that, other systems are sort of taking over the ecosystem, so to speak?
So SCADA is one part of a bigger picture at the end of the day. You've got various different layers in that stack to be able to accumulate your data, and SCADA is that acquisition layer, but you actually have to have a full strategy for digital transformation all the way up the stack. So that's from the collection point at the sensor, so that you've got accurate data to be able to populate up through the system. So from a SCADA level, we need to have that accurate data modeled all the way up so that we can potentially push it into the cloud. We don't have to start data cleaning. We don't have to, reconfigure everything at every stage of the process. So if we can get the data right at the sensor level with all the metadata and all the context around it, we do it once at the edge and we populate it all the way through the stack. That's the best case scenario for everyone, because from an Ignition point of view, we're able to normalize that data for everyone to be able to access it. So that might be in third-party products, that might be on different applications, different project levels, to solve different problems within the business. So we're able to do that, in a scalable way and using open technology.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree. SCADA is just I want to say a small piece of the pie, but still fairly critical, right? Because ultimately, with a good foundation, you can make sure that the data upstream is, so to speak, correct, accurate, and contextualized to be processed. But I mean, to get back to that like conversation, do you see manufacturers talk a lot about maybe some of the challenges they're experiencing on that side, or do you see it being like more higher level, right? Like at the MES or maybe like data analytics, are they expressing concerns with like SCADA systems, or do you think it's evolved like past that a little bit?
So no, they're always facing challenges in that space, right? So what we do is very in that normalization space. So they've usually got maybe one SCADA system existing that they've got on their plant, or they've got multiple different solutions for that particular siloed process. So that, from an integration point of view, that creates really big challenges, right? So you're talking maybe different protocol at the field bus level, you're talking about a different protocol at the PLC level, you're talking about even different coding stacks, or like different application layers. So what we're trying to do is create this normalization layer, so they're all talking that same language, and that's where we see the most challenges within companies, is that they're trying to bring in disparate pieces of information under one umbrella as a single pane of glass within their business, so that they don't have to retrain on multiple different platforms. They can bring all that data all together and then contextualize it in one single source of truth for their business. And that's where we're seeing the most, growth in the market, as that SCADA type application, but growing into other areas of the business to be able to create a holistic view of their business.
Yeah, and it's interesting, speaking of ignition, I find that I guess like as SCADA systems or platforms evolve, now they provide a lot more under like the same roof or the same package, so to speak, right? Whereas before maybe you thought of a SCADA as like an isolated island that only kind of like passes your data. Now it can do a lot more, right? And I think we talked with David about some examples where, let's say, Sepasoft now augments into like an MES solution, but ultimately even Ignition itself is capable of kind of processing that data and provide you with those dashboards. But Dave, maybe what are your thoughts? Because I know you've done a lot of these projects. What are your thoughts on what Phil is saying and SCADA in general?
Absolutely. So, Phil, I think that you laid kind of best case scenario out very well, right? So if you're able to have kind of these architecture questions very early on, you can make sure that the data sources, the data types, the system is set up to allow for, at some point in the future, getting to that single pane of glass. And if we want to call that digital transformation as the outcome of digital transformation, or if we want to call that, ideally what every owner or leader or CEO of a company should want. I mean, I guess from my perspective, the goal is for them to be able to pick up their phone, to look at like 6 things. And if all of those 6 things are thumbs up or green check marks or whatever we want that to be, them to know that, hey, my facility is running good. I can go work on putting out the 4,000 other fires that I have. So I absolutely agree with Phil, kind of what you're saying in your assessment. I guess kind of my question is from where you guys stand, iControls, where you guys stand as the distributor. Do you typically get to have those conversations with your customers going in? I guess in the world of nothing is typical, what is like that typical or that ideal style of conversation? Do they come to you with like nothing, saying, hey, Phil, we need to go through a digital transformation, how do I get there? What do those conversations look like, Phil?
So absolutely not. So no customer really comes in saying, I need to digitally transform my business, right? That is probably a typical buzzword, right?
Yep.
There. But what we do is we actively listen. And that is the key part to any sort of discovery call, is actively listening to the customer, understanding firstly, where they are,
Mm-hmm.
what's the system that they're using currently, how is it working for them, right? Understanding what are the challenges within that system, what are their objectives in this first discovery call, what's their best case scenario, what does that look like for them, and how can we plot a path for them utilizing ignition to be able to roll that out for them. And that might be talking about how can we show a return on investment for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to be using the system? What are the outside use cases that other particular stakeholders might utilize? So we might have a quality person wanting to be able to have a reporting tool, or we might have a maintenance manager who wants to be able to schedule jobs and have a work instruction. We might have the sales people using it as a CRM or an ERP system. So there are different facets within the business that we can tailor, I guess, a conversation around by actively listening. And we do find that customers need more stakeholders. If they are to digitally transform, they need a team around them to be able to support them with those objectives. So we talk at network security level, we talk at infrastructure, what server sizing they might need for the particular application. We talk at various different levels within the business to be able to build an internal business case for them to be able to utilize ignition as the product moving forward. But we do offer that technical support, having a technical skill set to be able to talk about those challenges at various different levels within the business. And we do have that within the iControls team, a very disparate automation focused team as well.
Absolutely. So if I may, Vlad. So Phil, what are kind of the typical entry level conversations that you have? If it's not digital transformation, and mind you, I think in I don't know, in the last 5 years, I might have had half a dozen people actually mention the phrase digital transformation. I've heard Industry 4.0 more often than that, but maybe half a dozen times have someone said, Dave, I need to digitally transform. In fact, most of the time when people ask me that question, the follow-up questions are, what does this mean and how do I do it, right? Exactly. Like I read about this, and it seems important, but I don't know what it is. So what is it and how do I do it? So what are the normal entry points that people are coming in and starting to have conversations with you?
So generally how it comes is that they're usually using some sort of legacy SCADA system that they have, and it might be one or it might be multiple. And they really are finding challenges within that kind of older technology stacks, or it's been working for them for a number of years, but it's time, to either renew their licensing, or they need to, move into, I guess, the next stage of evolution of their business, and they're hitting some walls within that infrastructure. Okay. Well, we come in and we kind of talk about capabilities, and we talk about, that what they can do to expand that system without having to rip and replace, because rip and replace is always that last ditch effort, right, to get in. What we do very well is add a layer of above the top and be able to ingest those legacy type architectures to be able to normalize that data and distribute it using that unlimited model that we support.
I was going to ask, I guess, and you partially maybe answered my question, but how much education do you have to typically do with customers, right? Like when they come to you maybe with a specific application or maybe even a legacy system, my assumption is that they don't necessarily understand what they can do with, let's say, Ignition or any other platform for that matter. How much do you have to almost like go in there and kind of discover what they have and then figure out how it might fit certain applications, and then not just, I want to say, like, tell them here's like an application, but explain to them really well what the business case might be.
And that really depends on the room that you're talking to, right? That tailoring that conversation to their skill set level, to their understanding of what the platform is. Do IT understand the OT infrastructure? Generally, it's a different conversation, right? It might be at network security level, it might be at access level, it might be at, how are we going to distribute that? What hardware do we need? What systems are out there? So it really understanding the room is actually one of the key sales tools that you can have, is understanding, what education do I need to do as part of this discovery section. And that really is, I guess, something that we do very well, is being able to understand what the problem is, who's coming to us, what is their role within the business, what are their driving factors for coming to us and asking the questions that they are, and what's the overall picture look like within their business to be able to support them in getting to those objectives. And so it is a kind of something that you learn only by doing type approach. And you can fall into some pitfalls as well, but the good thing is that if I always try and say, I don't know. if there's something I don't know, I will be honest about it, and I will ask the people that do know, basically. And I have a good supportive network to be able to lean on those people to be able to answer questions that I don't know.
No, I think that absolutely makes sense. And Phil, if I can expand a little bit on that, right? I'm curious, if you're seeing a lot of projects. Again, I think that Industry 4.0, to some degree, like digital transformation, is a fairly new or newish initiative, right? The way we're kind of rapidly changing, I want to say, in how we deploy these platforms. But are you seeing, people kind of jump right on board and, replacing their entire maybe infrastructure and rebuilding the architecture? Or are you seeing them maybe do here's a small project that we're going to test on a single line or maybe a single machine where we can get some of these analytics, then truly understand what the value is and then deploy? Like how do they look, from your perspective? Is it a mixed bag, of people? I'm just curious, what you're seeing in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are really, I guess, in Australia specifically, with Ignition, we've been around for 10 years. But I guess we're still seeing growth in this space. So we're getting a very wide range. So current users of 10 years almost using the platform, coming to us and saying, look, we need to move it to the next section within their infrastructure. Then we've got totally new users who've never used it, and we need full education around what the platform's capabilities are at this point. And then we've got, these system integrators that seeing opportunities within that sort of ecosystem to be able to leverage Ignition, to be able to roll out different applications within the same infrastructure as well. So there's this very wide conversation, and it is really around that discovery portion of that conversation that you're having with the customers. But we're seeing a rapid growth within Ignition, so they're doing lots of proof of concepts. They're downloading Ignition, building full-scale architectures under the unlimited trial as well, and they're fully having de-risking themselves by understanding the platform and understanding what the capabilities are, and almost ready to go when they start delivering these solutions for them.
Gotcha. And so just to, I guess, to be clear, you support other systems integrators and you support end users. Is that correct? Gotcha.
Correct.
Is there a difference?
So, yeah,
go ahead.
Yep. Is there a difference in the approach?
Well, in the approach, right, and I guess in the process, right? So I would assume that the systems integrators are a bit more tech savvy, so they're they know all the bells and whistles, but at the same time, maybe their understanding of the business value needs to be kind of buffed up versus an end user. And that's just my assumption, right? I would like you to elaborate on this. The end users
Sure.
understand the business value that they're seeking versus on the tech side, maybe a little bit less.
That's right. So from an end user point of view, they're looking for business outcomes. They're looking for increased productivity, overall efficiency, data availability, right? And being able to access that data. Whereas system integrators are identifying problems within that business ecosystem, and then being able to use Ignition to deliver on those systems. And so really, Ignition for the system integrator is a tool for them to solve problems for their customers. And that just keeps on going, right? That's because there's a unlimited architecture there. You can deliver project after project after project on the same infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So when the end user sees a return on investment, they may see it for the initial POC, or they may see it for the initial installation, but they'll see it for a lot longer period after that period, because we'll just extend on the same infrastructure.
Bill, if I could follow up a slightly tangential question, but still sure. Very related to systems integration and SCADA. So on the HR side, right? So you said that the market is definitely expanding. I think we're seeing similar trends in the US and Europe. Are you seeing that there's maybe a deficit in engineering talent or engineering technician, people who deploy these systems? Is there a lack of talent currently that we see on the market? Do you see salaries growing? Do you see people struggling to hire? Is that the opposite, or are they going to different fields? So traditionally I've seen a lot of kind of instrumentation techs or engineers kind of come up and get into SCADA. Are you seeing maybe a trend where now we're talking about Python, let's say, for Ignition, so a lot of software engineers come into Ignition? What are you seeing from like an HR standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So from that traditional OT layer coming up into the SCADA level, it's a little bit tricky. There is a bit of a deficit there in terms of skill set that I do see in the market that, that we need more system integrators out there to be able to support definitely an Ignition growing ecosystem, for sure. And that's why we try and enable that education period with free online training, through Inductive University. And we also try and, do it more locally within our training facility as iControls as well. But we also have as part of Inductive University's university engagement program, we can actually support our local education bodies with licensing that's available to them, so that they can embed that in their curriculum, so that we can prepare more engineers for the industry. So we've got a few challenges that we all face in terms of internal training, upskilling workforces. We are definitely seeing, more Python ready students coming through that operation, as you said, and Ignition kind of lends itself to that, with having a scripting language that is, more structured text based and easy, human readable as well. So, that really lends well to, the engineers of tomorrow being really, a vital part in that future for Ignition and for, the industry at large.
And I would add to that, inductive automation certainly raised the bar on the education side. And we're by no means sponsored by Ignition, but I know that they provide really good, educational materials that you mentioned on their website. But they also, and I think that's like really key, they pair that with the free, 2-hour license. So you can very easily reset and try absolutely every single feature that you would get on the Ignition platform. And now I think, and when I say now, it's been at least a year or maybe 2 years now, they've released the maker's license, right? So that you can, as a student, I'm assuming
3, 4?
Maybe it's been a while.
I think 3 or 4, yeah.
Okay.
So I actually have a funny comment about the maker's license. So I don't know how many folks outside of Phil know that especially the technical guys over at Inductive Automation, but they are some of the people who like love home automation more than anyone else I've ever met. And so the first time you meet these guys, that they talk about home automation, like 5-6 years ago, they were pulling out their phones and turning lights on and turning lights off. I'm pretty sure that they created this maker edition only to allow other people not to have to buy $50,000 or $60,000 of software to be able to be able to go through the process of doing home automation in the same ways they do. And yeah, and yes, school people and everyone else can also get those tangential benefits. But the first time I saw it, I'm like, this looks like this is the home automation freebie license, so that everyone can go ahead and make some awesome make some awesome things out of it. I want to like slightly shift the conversation away, Phil. So you talked about some legacy market. So one of the things that I always like to do whenever we've got people from different continents on is to talk a little bit about what the automation landscape looks like. And so we can compare it back to at least kind of what I generally know, more so in North America than anything else. But before I put you on the spot, I will give all of our new Australian listeners a little bit of a kind of overview of kind of what the US, the American US Canadian market looks like. And then if you guys are watching live, Vlad's actually going to go point to all the PLCs behind him while we're doing this live. He doesn't know this yet, but now he does. So I would say kind of broadly, the vast majority of especially the hardware market that we see is Rockwell and Allen Bradley. I would say we're conservatively 80 to 85%, especially legacy Rockwell, Allen Bradley PLCs. We have maybe 5 to 10% Siemens. Vlad, you're supposed to be pointing. Yeah, so for anyone listening on podcast form, Vlad has, I don't know, 24 different PLCs and controllers and everything else behind it. And so I feel like I've got to make the poke at least once a show while I can. But no, I would say the kind of the distant second, but the solid second is probably Siemens on the hardware side. So depending upon particular industries and verticals, we'll see more Siemens. So Siemens, we talk a lot about them, especially in the automotive sector. In the US and the Americas. And then kind of beyond that, it's kind of a smattering of everyone else. I would say since COVID happened, since the supply chain crunch, we've seen a lot more, or at least we've heard a lot more people buying Opto 22s. Vlad can go ahead and point to the Opto 22. He's got a Rio and a Groove Epic up there. Thank you, Vlad. And then we also see a lot more PLC Nexts. And Vlad, now, if anyone is frustrated that they can't get a PLC Next, it's because Vlad literally has all of them. And I'm going to take this moment to go ahead and plug the PLC Next class that Vlad and Solus PLC have put together. You guys can check that out on solusplc.com. They put a whole bunch of things in there. Vlad is probably the second most knowledgeable person about PLC Next, next to Phil, but that's because Phil spent an awful lot of time working and selling PLC Next. But I would say it's great if you can get your hands on them. And again, the only hard part is Vlad has stolen all of them, and that's why the market doesn't have any PLC Nexts in it. But no, to kind of reiterate, we see a lot of the US market on the hardware side being that Rockwell, that Allen Bradley. I would say on the software side, you see a lot of people who got into the Wonderware, especially in the 90s. If you went and you redid something in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, you almost certainly did it on Wonderware. We see a lot of plant packs. We see a lot of kind of beyond that. We see a variety, kind of that smattering of those Siemens, depending upon industry specific verticals. Aviva and Wonderware still have a bunch of fairly industry leading but fairly proprietary visualizations and softwares. And then I would say I see Ignition. I guess maybe I won't necessarily say I see Ignition, but I probably hear about 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 facilities at least know what Ignition is, which is significantly more than it was 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, I was selling primarily Ignition as part of MES. And that was, I don't know, at least 50 or 60% of people didn't know what it was. But now I would say at least the vast majority of people, either they know what it is or within a quick Google, it will iterate. And it's not uncommon to see it brought up as a viable option. And so I say all of that to give Phil the opportunity to think about what the Australian market looks like, because again, we'd love to hear a little bit about what the Australian market look like, and Vlad will again point to all of them behind his head while Phil is talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in the Australian market, it's very similar to the US, but there are a few smatterings of other brands there that really have, I guess, legacy type applications in Australia. And so we see a lot of DCS systems from Yokogawa, from Emerson's range out in the mining infrastructure and oil and gas infrastructure, because we have a lot of that type of infrastructure here in Australia, being a quite resource driven country as well. So we have some challenges there around remote connectivity and sort of that sort of stage. We also have a large infrastructure when it comes to Schneider, Cytec infrastructure in the water industry, especially in the utility space. We're definitely seeing, I guess, more Siemens and Allen Bradley, of course, is a huge proportion of the market here in Australia as well. So we get kind of all the different mix of everything, because we're, you know, as a country, we're not too old, right? 150 odd years old. You know, we get kind of some of the, I guess, immigration of the different systems. So depending on, you know, who put it in at what point of time, we get a kind of a smattering of everything, pretty much. But yeah, we have a large proportion of Allen Bradley, and we're seeing, as you said, a move to Opto 22's hardware as well. iControls is a distributor for Opto 22 as well, so we support that range locally as well. And we have I guess a big range of products out in Australia.
So I love that, and I want to follow up on that Opto 22, because one of the favorite things that I see posted on LinkedIn is Phil talking about the Opto 22 and the EMU, right? So the energy management unit that they have come out with, and I think
for Australia, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. No, I was going to say, I think my favorite post I've seen about it is Phil posting the controller and then posting the bird next to it. And I forget what the text was. I just remember that I spent 5 or 10 minutes kind of laughing about that. So do you see the move towards a lot of energy management? Is that a newer thing out in Australia? I guess from my perspective, I read and have read for the last 4 or 5 years about energy issues, right? Like there's never enough energy. And so do you see a lot of people managing energy, and is that a new thing, or is there a move towards doing more of that?
Well, you know, socially, we have a responsibility to be more sustainable, right, at the end of the day. But we also have this move towards renewable energy and energy storage as well in that utility space. So we have to really manage the network infrastructure in a really strategic way, because otherwise we have these imbalances on the network which cause all kinds of issues. So from a local level, if we're monitoring and managing that infrastructure, so the EMU is perfect for monitoring, you know, one particular process line or one particular piece of equipment to enable you to make decisions whether or not it's worth running at this particular time, or you know, how much are we actually paying for energy when we're running this particular line, and is it cost effective to do so? So collecting that data, especially in that energy usage space, is really vital for any business to be able to give that holistic view, right? Should we be investing in solar on the roof to be able to supplement some of that energy, right? Can we run the office on solar and the production line off the grid? You know, like, you can start making these educated decisions around how you accumulate your data by, you know, putting one of these Opto 22 group Rios, you know, straight there on the edge, and be able to collect that data into your infrastructure really easily as well. So yeah, it's a really good question.
Absolutely. And so I know
Go ahead,
Vlad
Dave.
has a question, but I've got a comment on energy. Actually, I've got a couple of comments on energy. So, from the first time I saw the emu, my first thought is, man, wouldn't it be great to be able to go talk to a site and go drop a box off with one of these, put current transformers, clip it on a couple of places, kind of monitor the energy, leave it in the box, and come back a week or two later with some nice visualizations to say, hey, this is how much energy we actually used compared to maybe what we think we used, and overlay that with the cost per kilowatt hour. I think that would, I guess, that's one of those things that may be a winter project on my side, is how can I go put that together to make it easy and feasible to do that, or potentially do that in scale. And I love the comments that you had about solar, Phil. I would say that I had a group that I work with who did a project, kind of their end user had the problem of, well, basically they never knew how much power was going to cost them. And kind of the power energy company was able to kind of give them kind of a range, but the range was like plus or minus, I don't know, 25%, which isn't super helpful when they spent more than $1 million a month in power, right? So it's very hard to kind of guess what it is. So the initial request was, help us figure out how much we're going to be. I think the initial hope was like plus or minus 10%. And I think they got it to plus or minus like 0.5, 1%, so something along those lines. And so there was kind of that initial, hey, we know how much power we're using. This is amazing. We can go kind of monitor how much power we're using per piece of equipment. And then kind of the next easy step for them was cogeneration. So at least in the States, depending upon where you are, you may be required contractually through the power company to do cogeneration. With them, they were big. They were big we'll just call them big generators, right? And so kind of for them, the easy step was going to figure out how much, like what days of the month are the most expensive, and then depending upon what days of the month are most expensive, just plan to go run the cogeneration during those days, or any day that is above X number of cents or dollars per kilowatt hour. We are going to go run the cogeneration because we actually save money running the cogeneration on those days. So I think that there is a lot of good opportunities for almost every large facility that I work with to have a better idea of how much energy each of their buildings, lines, plants are using, and then make valuable decisions based upon those.
I was gonna make the comment, because I've ran energy savings projects, and I think there's even, I want to say, like lower hanging fruit. Once you install these monitoring systems, you can correct just like pure loads, and based on your power factor, usually you get charged a premium. So again, something like very first couple of days, you can immediately see what's going on a specific production line or even site, and you can just literally rebalance your inductive loads, and that very quickly pays for the device first of all, but also the labor put in on installing it in the facility. But as they've mentioned, I think it can go very far in terms of like what can you do. But again, I think there's kind of like first fundamental steps, and I can tell you even something as simple as we're doing a changeover that takes like 6 hours, and that's done every week. So just shutting down the conveyors, which is normally not done because again nobody monitors energy consumption,
Yep.
pays for the device within a couple of months. So usually just very simple changes in the way the process is automated is very easy to pay for itself. And that's not even considering all the auxiliary, right? Like you can again go into different energy sources and balancing it based on days. And I've never gotten into like that deep of an experience, but like I said, it was very quick with just the few examples that I mentioned.
Yeah, but as you said, like if you're monitoring several different lines, you can compare how they are moving, effectively. That might mean that one particular motor might need a bearing change, right?
Yep.
That it might be just as simple as that. Just, being able to compare multiple different lines gives you that opportunity to have a wider view on the system and make decisions. Why is this running not as effective as possible? Then you can actually identify a problem for you to solve. And that's what it is about, is creating that data visibility to make educated decisions.
And a lot of times, that's where the capability of drives comes in, that they can monitor that almost themselves. But in many instances, I don't see end users like capturing that data. I think they're getting better and better, but I think it's kind of maybe one of those like engineering metrics that someone who really knows, I want to say, like power factor correction and how that impacts the
Mhm.
line wants to gather. But it's more used for troubleshooting right now. But yes, I agree that you can certainly do a lot of with that data if you know what you're doing. And again, I think that goes back to our conversation on having context, understanding what it means, understanding where it's tied into, going right into your SCADA, and then going into an analytics tool that is designed specifically for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we talk about context, so when we're all the people that are on the plant floor, they hold all that context. So it's a
Mhm.
really important discussion from our perspective is that we talk to the end users at various different layers of that business to be able to communicate that context layer up through the business, because the guys on the floor know, why this machine has been running like it has for the last 10 years.
Mhm.
But, someone at the IT layer won't understand, what they need to see on the screen to be able to make sure that, that alarm management system is going to alert them when something goes out of spec, right? So that contextualization and discussion goes all the way through the business, and that's where a system integrator is really good to understand some of that process and some of that intrinsic knowledge that is held within that plant floor infrastructure, and be able to communicate that to the rest of the business through maybe a dashboarding tool, or as Dave said, those 6 points of health of their business. And so that's where there's real power in distributing that contextualization.
I
Absolutely,
would
100%.
agree. And I would say that I find that that's even a big differentiators between systems integrators from one to the other. There are many people who are able to go pull data points from a PLC and put it in a dashboard. I mean, I've seen some who put it in kind of like a butchered looking Excel spreadsheet on an ignition page, right? But I find that the best systems integrators are the people that are able to help contextualize what the data looks like and be able to talk to it from groups at a variety of different levels, right? Because to Phil's point, that the people who know how the machine runs and why the machine runs that way, they're going to look for some very specific things to make sure that the machine is running well. And maybe they can go look at that on a dashboard while they're in the middle of doing other things to make sure that the machine is running well. But the line owner generally doesn't care about the thing. He generally cares that the line, that the machines within the line are running well. And the engineering managers are going to care about different things, and the plant managers are going to care about different things. And if you get to a point that you've got a person who is in charge of 6, 8, 10, a dozen plants, they care about very different things than the people who are actively working on the machines. And I think that that's some of the biggest opportunities that we will see as we look into the future, and kind of differentiators both from system to system and integrators and other people who can have those conversations and tell those stories in easy ways. And kind of to that point, we have a question or maybe a comment here from Carolina. She says, "Hey everyone, Phil, in the case of having a project that contains a large amount of data where the client wants them to be historized, do you find a way to propose a solution that is competitive so that other brands, competitive to other brands that are maybe more into the historization of that data?" She says that they understand that Ignition works with any SQL database, and can you share some experience that lead to positive outcomes, right? So I think that the comment is towards the historization. And do you, I guess, again, we don't know the Australian market, but we find that more and more organizations are storing more data. And we had a long conversation last week about, should we store everything or should we not store everything? We don't have to rehab that conversation now.
Okay.
But we find more and more organizations are wanting to store more data points, somewhere between more and all of their data points. How do you see maybe the offerings that you guys have, Ignition and otherwise, comparing to other solutions that you compete against?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of data storage and looking at that sort of database ecosystem, as Carolina mentioned, that we are as SQL based platform. So anything with a JDBC driver can be connected to that. So that really enables choice, right? So you might want to have a particular flavor of database for a particular performance issue. So you're able to change your strategy in terms of data storage to be able to suit your application. We've seen many customers using Ignition as that accumulation layer because they have a long-term storage strategy, but they aren't able to, I guess, access that long-term storage in a really effective way. So what they do is they use Ignition as a middleware layer to be able to ingest all that data and access it in a highly efficient manner. And that might be a localized or a distributed historian type architecture, so that local site might have a historian database, or it might be in the central like administrative hub, or various different places around the architecture itself.
Absolutely, and I will throw out to that for everyone that doesn't know, I spent an awful large portion of the previous years of my life working in the Ignition ecosystem. But if you want to, you don't have to connect it to that SQL database, right? You can pull it out into a time series database if you want to do an OSIsoft Pi, which at least in most of what I see is kind of the gold standard, be it OSIsoft itself or the Rockwell historian or the Emerson historian, or maybe one or two of the Wonderware historians. Those kind of always get a little iffy for me. But the OSIsoft Pi has always been the gold standard. I know you can go connect Canary if you want another good time series database option. I've seen people roll their own time series databases on Ignition with InfluxDB or something along those lines. So SQL is kind of what you get generally out of the box. It's very easy for most people, but if you want to get in and use some of those other tools, as Phil mentioned, Ignition as a middleware to go collect all that data. Maybe you do some crazy things like contextualize it or normalize it, so all of the tags that go into these end systems actually make sense, and we don't have to spend 2 years before having a data scientist go back to actually contextualize these. You guys can do crazy things like contextualize them in the Ignition ecosystem before they go to a time series database. Kind of the world, the sky is the limit. And I would say to Carolina, if you had any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to Phil, especially if you are over in Australia, or to myself or Vlad if you've got any other questions and are looking for some help on that.
Phil, I want to follow up with a lighter discussion. So shifting gears a little bit, you've built quite a brand on LinkedIn as part of your sales journey, if you want to call it that, I guess, or your journey, I guess, to become a more digitally transformed salesperson, if I can put a label on that. That being said, maybe could you walk us through, how, and I guess like why your mindset shifted maybe from the traditional selling to LinkedIn? And I'd also be interested in maybe, stepping in the shoes of, I want to say, like a smaller systems integrator who's just getting started or maybe has a few employees. What kind of advice you would give them if they would want to attempt a similar path to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, so LinkedIn, the motivator for LinkedIn was, the rise of social media. As a communication point, it's really powerful in talking to the many, not the few, right? But doing it in a really personal way. And that's the motivation for me, is actually I'm just an oversharer more than anything, a classic oversharer. So anything I kind of learn, I wanted to distribute and understand, so that through my Phoenix years, I was learning about different products within the range that no one had ever heard about, or my customers hadn't heard about, or they didn't know particularly about this particular product or this particular problem that I was trying to solve for another customer. and it's really about adding that value to my immediate customers and the wider audience. I'm about, you know, supporting others to succeed, and that's really my driving factor. And from a I guess a operational point of view from LinkedIn, you know, as it's really about commitment to doing something regularly, right? I try and be active and really be an active participant in a community. So creating, I guess, being quite creative myself, enjoying it as well, having a lot of fun with different products or smart home devices, or, you know, different SCADA platforms, or whatever I'm doing at the time. And it might be, you know, learning a bit about Python, or it might be learning about Node-RED or MQTT, or whatever I'm doing at the time. I'm just thinking about how can I share this knowledge? How can I, you know, make it consumable to the wider audience? It doesn't always have to be highly technical. It can be really ingestible, and I really wanted to really support by kind of broadening everyone's horizons about what's possible. Because if I can solve one person's problem today with one post, then that's my mission complete, really. And so I really am here just to really keep doing what I'm doing and keep having fun and meeting new people like you guys and the wider automation community. And look, if they are, you know, feel free to get in touch with me, because that's what I want to do. Is I want to build, you know, these friends online and build a network of like-minded individuals that share my passion for automation, whether that be at home or in an industrial setting.
I will say, I guess, if you're listening to this in podcast form, all the links, especially to Phil's LinkedIn channel, are going to be in the description, so you'll be able to stop on your way to work or home and find them under the podcast. That being said, Phil, I guess any words of wisdom or thoughts around that side, you know, for someone who's maybe afraid to get started, or again is maybe very technically savvy but doesn't know how to start, like selling, or maybe just exposing their thoughts out there on LinkedIn or otherwise, right? I think it's not necessarily a strategy for purely LinkedIn, but just sort of changing the way we did sales back in the day, I want to say. But obviously, you're a lot more familiar with the industry, so I'm going to let you speak on that point.
Well, look, if I have any advice to anyone trying to, I guess, build a personal brand or create a community, it's be your true, authentic self. That's the only thing you need to do, right? If you really want to share the knowledge or share everything, I see it all the time in forums across the internet, right? Is people sharing their knowledge base, people on YouTube, you know, creating content and really trying to add something to the community. And there's plenty of open source community out there, so you can download, you know, Node-RED for free. So if you're getting, you know, really you want to understand an IoT type of ecosystem and you want to learn MQTT, that's a really good starting point. You can use Ignition Maker, which is a free resource as well, to create your own home automation system. You know, there are real platforms out there that we can really leverage to grow our knowledge base as a whole wider.
Well, sounds like Phil was at the tip top of that point, but hopefully he's able to reconnect momentarily. But no, I would agree that, you know, there's a lot of tools. Phil, we lost you for just a second.
Sorry.
We're going to finish that point. But I would agree, I guess, on that point, and let you finish your thought as well, that there's a lot of free tools that you can certainly get involved in, right? I'm assuming that's what you were going to say, but Absolutely. I'll let you continue.
No, absolutely. So yeah, you can download various different platforms to be able to increase your knowledge base, right? And leverage those online tool sets to really develop high quality home automation systems that can be developed then out in the real world and test your knowledge and learn SQL and learn Python and learn MQTT and all these technologies to be able to apply in your everyday life as well. So there's plenty of resources out there.
Absolutely. I love this. I love this, Phil. But before we get to the normal closing questions that we ask everyone, I guess the question for you is there anything that we haven't asked you about distribution, about Australia, about your crazy journey from London to Australia? Is there anything that we should have asked you that we haven't asked you yet?
Well, I guess one point is that Australia is a vast country, right? And so we have some real challenges in remote connectivity.
Okay.
So that is one thing that we really, I guess, try and support our customers with is understanding that application where you've got very disparate networking infrastructure. You might have 3G, you might have 4G, you might have LTE, you might have LoRa connections, you might have all these different technology stacks within your ecosystem. And understanding, I guess, the benefits of particular technology stacks is really key for especially Australian projects. Where and when to apply different technologies is something that we're looking for, and MQTT enables that really well. That remote connectivity portion of definitely our customer base, because it enables that store and forward capability, where you've got spotty connections, you can backfill data and you never lose a drop of it. So that's a real key focus for the Australian landscape, basically physically and from the infrastructure point of view.
Okay, so that's interesting. So do you guys see a lot so I would imagine you guys see a lot of edge gateways to help with that store and forward. Do you guys find a lot of radio, kind of, long range radio? Do you guys find a lot of cellular? Do you guys use, does satellite exist? I mean, what does that landscape look like? How do I would assume the vast majority of people that make things in Australia who aren't along the coast and near major cities, how does that typically happen?
Well, we're seeing, I guess, a vast array of solutions in that space. So it could be a 900 megahertz radio. It could be internal Wi-Fi connections. It could be a satellite, and Starlink, or other satellite providers is starting to become more of a conversation point within the industry as well. And that connectivity portion, because we're so disparate and we're monitoring assets that may be hundreds of thousands of hectares in terms of, literally farms that are size of countries within Australia, right? We need that connectivity conversation to be able to accumulate all that data and still keep consistency in that data set as well. So it's an interesting conversation around that connectivity portion, especially for Australian customers.
Very interesting. I have certainly dealt with a number of those applications, although when I find those remote applications, it's typically mountainous terrain or large trees or other things that cause issues more than, this ranch is the size of, I don't know, Rhode Island. And the issue is that we own a ranch the size of Rhode Island or West Texas or something, something along those lines. So the vastness of the continent and the country that is Australia, I imagine, brings its own unique set of challenges. So do you find more and more kind of these remote applications are coming to try to leverage technologies? I guess, are you seeing more and more of them kind of coming to leverage these technologies, and then also saying, hey, we need to go connect ourselves to the internet so that we can go go acquire all the value of the data science of, AWS and Greengrass and all of those other machine learning capabilities?
Yeah, so from a domestic point of view, like agri-tech is at the moment really growing in that space. You know, they're bringing in all these IoT devices from agricultural, you know, animal management systems, you know, that have inbuilt satellite tags that are on the necks of the cows, because you know, time is money, right? Fuel for a helicopter to try and find that animal is going to be costly, and if you don't know where it is, right? In the olden days, they used radio transmitters to be able to track them, but now they can get precise GPS data from where that particular animal is, you know, and that really will save a huge amounts in cost and time for those customers that use that type of application. And then, you know, monitoring water is a huge priority for Australian customers in the deserts of the Australian outback, right? Where water sometimes rains maybe not even once a year, you know, that type of arrangement. So you know, understanding what your dam levels are, what your water usage is, you know, those types of applications really need vital, I guess, monitoring from that point of view as well. So, yeah, it is a growing IoT type landscape here in Australia, and we're seeing some really high-tech solutions coming out of Australia, and it's been really interesting to see that evolve.
That is very interesting. So I will make the comment, if anyone is interested in that sustainability, in that IoT style offerings, we actually had a really good conversation on episode 64 with a gentleman named Robert Tiffany, kind of about that. He is building a company that they are moving towards. How can we go help people do this? And we actually had a very long conversation, not necessarily about the technology, but how do we go deploy a workforce to be able to allow us to go deploy this technology? And his comment, I will kind of summarize it for everyone, was something to the effect of, even if we only have to deploy one of these sensors every acre, every hectare, for our Australian listeners, and there is 1,000 or 10,000 hectares of this location, and it only takes an hour to do each one. It's 10,000 hours, right? It's 5 man years to be able to go to deploy all of these. And we can't have one person go spend 5 years doing this. So how do we go build a sustainable workforce? I think Rob's comments were something around IIoT is the plumbing of the industrial world. So we need to build a new group of plumbers to allow us to go kind of bring this to the rest of, the outback. Yeah, so we'll go with the outback. And so I think that that's a very interesting path that we as a community, we as a world are going to have to go figure out, because if we want more information and more data from these remote places, or even these not so remote places, we need to go figure out how to put together a group, a not insubstantial group of people in order to help us go deploy these. And then at some point, these are going to go break. So now we have to go find people to go troubleshoot them or replace them, or kind of anything along that line. But I think the future will be very interesting. And talking about the future, Phil, we always like to put our guests on the spot and ask you guys to predict the future, right? So we talked about a whole bunch of different things, and I guess I'm going to open it up and ask you to predict the future. So the next time you're on, be it 6 months or another year from now, we can look back and say, wow, Phil either really nailed it, or wow, Phil really whiffed on this. Maybe we have to go give him another chance to predict this and then come back. So Phil, what do you think the future of automation, of distribution, of manufacturing, what does that look like in your mind?
Look, I have a few hopes and dreams in that space, I guess, and the hope is that, you know, more openness is available within the industry. We do see some, I guess, more proprietary systems out there that seem to you know, lock down a lot of those silos, and I'm looking for, you know, an ecosystem of openness, that share different, I guess, data points and different observations, and really do a collaborative approach, because that's really what I'm about, is collaboration. And I see, I guess, a real drive. I'm seeing more drive towards openness, more recently, but I really hope that is the future of automation, is that interoperability portion and openness, and really driving those core values through to the industry. And that's what I'll be trying to do in my own day-to-day life as well.
Absolutely. I think that would be amazing. I think that would be amazing if we are to get there. We have talked certainly in the past about our hope for open, whether it be open source or more open ability to kind of rip and replace components into the future. I think I have said, I hope we get there in our lifetimes. But with how closed off and siloed we are, I think we made great progress in the last 5 to 10 years. There's just an awfully long way to go before we get to the openness. But I know I speak for Vlad and myself that we are very hopeful that we get there at some point. Vlad hopes we get there yesterday, but I am hopeful we will maybe get there at some point within our lifetimes. But speaking of content, Phil, you talked about content, you talked about consistency. Now is the time that we love to ask for recommendations. So if people aren't following you on LinkedIn, first go follow Phil on LinkedIn to go see his daily comments about ignition, about hardware, software, automation, manufacturing. Maybe he'll post some more emu pictures, and then I'll spend the next 10 minutes laughing. But besides you, Phil, what other content recommendations do you have? Who else should we go follow? Who else should we go? What else should we go look at?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few, I guess, left field, not so mainstream, I guess, content creators that I'd like to kind of shout out in this opportunity. One early doors real contributor to my career was a guy called Raj Singh, who does the Code and Compile channel, and that's a real opportunity to learn everything that you need, from Node-RED to modeling and ignition, and all kind of different platforms that he's creating real content around. And that's a real vital one, and you can find them on YouTube as well. There are some IoT type I guess channels out there as well. One is by a Swiss guy called Andreas Spieth, and I'll send you all the links to put in the comments for sure. And he does all sort of like Arduino based Raspberry Pi MCUs, all homemaker type projects, but really are kind of laying foundations for industrial IoT. So he explains all those MQTT and LoRa and NB-IoT and all these other different IoT protocols and principles that kind of blow your mind about what can be done, and not for huge amounts of outlay and cost as well. So that's always a benefit. And then I've got another one which is a little bit small as well. It's an English guy called Steve Cope, and he does a lot of Node-RED based content as well, and that's a really good resource to be able to leverage. Yeah, it's on YouTube. Yeah, Steve Cope, so COPE, and he does a lot of same sort of similar industry for IoT type infrastructure, but from a very highly technical point of view as well. So that's a one to do. And then there's the Industry 4 Solutions guys and IoT University. And then obviously one thing I will say is download Ignition Maker, because that is going to be your playground for all of these different technologies in an industrial setting. And I have a lot of fun developing within my LinkedIn channel and stuff, and sharing some of those projects that I've done internally, like connecting to my robot vacuum cleaner, creating a pantry inventory system, and creating some really cool projects there as well. So yeah, there's plenty out there to be able to leverage.
I've been a bit shy on pulling the trigger on the house automation things, because from what I heard, it becomes a little bit touchy with the next owner, when they come in and they need to understand what's going on, but it's really interesting. I guess like it's becoming more and more like plug and play, and like I'm assuming your ignition instance just runs like on a smaller device, like an IPC or maybe even like a Raspberry Pi in that sense, and so it's easier to
At the
configure.
moment, it's just running on my desktop computer,
Okay, okay,
just for
but
flexibility. But the aim is, yes, to move it to a small IPC.
gotcha. No, it's interesting, and I guess like I've not to dove into maybe some of those projects, but I've certainly heard of a lot of people going that route. Like I said, I'm just a little bit worried, maybe for someone who's not permanently settled here, or maybe thinking of like some other options in a
Mhm.
couple of years, what that would look like during the sale. But I think it
But
would be
the
really cool to do it.
Well, the good thing is that you can use wireless technology, right?
Mhm.
You can use light bulbs that just plug in, smart light bulbs. You can use different technology stacks to be
Yep.
able to enable it. So they can be mobile devices. So you can have a temperature and humidity sensor that is just battery operated. You can have a door sensor that is just battery operated, right? And you're able to take those movable objects with you, and you can use, Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi
Yep.
or a Node Red, or all these things don't have to be fixed as well. So you're able to do it within your rental accommodation, and still have that comfort of home automation, but be able to remove it when you do eventually move on. So there are different tactics around that as well.
Yeah, I'll need to read up
Absolutely.
about it a bit more for sure.
So Vlad, I can hook you up with some podcasts that will take you way into the rabbit hole of home automation and do's and don'ts and smart plugs and all of those things. What we really want to see you do, Vlad, is to run all of it on Ignition Maker on a Mac Mini that lives somewhere directly behind you. Maybe we just Velcro it to the wall on the Mac Mini that lives directly behind you. That's what the world wants to see. So we'll see if Phil and I can't twist Vlad's arm and get him to do that. But no, I think that all of those are really good recommendations. Thank you, Phil. I know RIP both Vlad and my's YouTube algorithm. After we go spend the next 5 or 6 hours watching a bunch of those videos. So thank you for that. So we always love to ask about career advice, and I loved how at the very beginning you said that you have a very non-traditional career path in order to get you where you are in automation, in sales, in distribution. And Phil, I think that I speak for the last 85 guests when I tell you that I don't think that there is a linear career path to get where any of us have gotten. If I have learned anything, it's that there is no linear career path. There are very few people that go to college and take like a macademics style course and then end up in manufacturing and automation and sales engineering. So we love to ask for some career advice from you with a very broad career. What is your career advice for people looking to get into the industry or maybe looking to make the step into a sales position?
Well, the key thing for me, it was always find something that you love, right? If you There's an old saying that if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's what I've tried to kind of do, and that might not be, that I love the thing that I was doing for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can find something that aligns with your passions and aligns with what you're happy doing with at the time, then you will never work in your life. So that's really the core fundamentals, is finding something that you're passionate about,
Mm-hmm.
maybe looking particularly for that industry that supports those either technicalities, or that environment that will enable you to be a really successful person, and have that supportive network to enable you to do that sort of thing. And that's a challenge in itself to try and find those roles, but they're out there, and you can certainly fill that niche where you need to, but and try and craft a career path that you're ultimately happy with.
I love that. That is great. I'm going to ask the slight follow-up question because it is very it is something I'm sure Vlad will ask, whether on or off stream, is moving from those technical positions into a sales position? Was it, I mean, you're still here, so I assume that it was a generally positive path, but there's always some sort of leap to go from the, hey, I'm the person doing the work, to now I'm going to go talk to people to convince them that we need to do the work, and maybe I will, maybe I won't be the person who does that work. So moving from the technical side to the sales engineering position, do you have any career advice, anyone looking, any career advice maybe for someone looking before they go make the leap from that position to a sales engineering position?
Yeah, so there are some challenges when moving from a technical role to a more front of house role, right? And that comes with some of the sales activities that are, required as part of the role in sales, and that is the communication piece. I found myself, when first moving into sales, really nervous and kind of jittery when I had to pick up a phone and call a customer that I had never spoken to ever before. And that was a real challenge. But if I can give one piece of advice there, is just do it, right? And keep doing it and keep practicing and keep grinding away at that, because the more you flex, the more you practice, the better and easier it will become. I really don't like public speaking. I've kind of, one of the reasons why it's taken so long to get on this podcast is me to have the courage to do so, right? As well. So, but when you're at a point where you've practiced enough, you've done enough online kind of content, or you've called the customer 4 or 5 times, and you start getting a rhythm, then it becomes more natural for you to be able to do that, and you get outside of that fear factor into that more comfortable zone, and you'll find yourself loving what you do.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. And I will say, anyone who is an engineer going from the technical role to the sales role, remember, you get to promise that everything will be done for no extra budget, no extra time, because you're no longer the person who has to go do the work at the end. You can be the person that everyone hates with memes on the internet. But no, I think that was some amazing advice. I appreciate that, Phil. And then last question that we have for you is, who should reach out? Who do you want to connect with? Who do you want to talk about? What sort of customer is iControls looking for? Are you guys hiring? Kind of any and all of those things. This is your opportunity to ask our listeners anything.
Yeah, so I mean, really, I guess, follow me on LinkedIn. Also follow our iControls page as well. So we're starting to, I guess, create more digital content around, more broader topics as well for next year. And we're really looking for, I guess, end users that have those ingrained challenges within their business that we can help and really architect solutions that enable you to be able to grow and scale those operations really in an unlimited way. And that's where we really show our true value, is understanding the customer's current situation and how we can move them forward within their infrastructure. So please follow that, follow our iControls LinkedIn page. Have a look at our website, www.icontrols.com.au, and get in contact with us mostly, and really just kind of start the conversation, because that's where we really want to be.
This is amazing. Phil, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. Again, if you are from Australia listening for the first time, there's typically only 5% of you on the podcast. So 5 or 10 of you a week that go download it. Thank you guys very much. I will go ahead and make the comment, because I have learned that if I ask people to like and subscribe and download our stuff, people like and subscribe and download our stuff, which helps push more of it into everyone's feed. So if you guys are listening on podcast format, please feel free to go rate us 5 stars everywhere you can rate us 5 stars. Please feel free to subscribe so it auto downloads into your ear holes, every week. Our podcasts come out on Thursdays. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitch and Facebook and all of those other places every Wednesday afternoon or early evening, or maybe very early in the morning if you guys are on Australia. time. And then if you want to check us out, you guys can find us at manufacturinghub.live, which is where all of our podcasts and everything funnel into. If you want to see the previous guests, if you guys want to go ahead and do any of those things, please feel free to do that. If you've got questions, thoughts, comments, please feel free to reach out. If you guys have ideas on guests or other things, we always love having conversations with you. Until next week, we will see everyone soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.